I'll now pass over to my friend and colleague Jason Sun, who's a partner in this event, to lead our second panel discussing first-hand trade insights, advice and innovation with experienced China market professionals. So over to you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia, and thanks, David, for a very insightful discussion. So we're on the second panel. The second panel is about really hearing people who had first-hand information, people who are on the ground, not just armchair experts, but people who have contemporary and real experience in China. Certainly, David have those. I can testify that David, I have the pleasure of traveling with David as part of Victorian delegation to China. David is certainly like a duck take to water and got into the culture, both business and personal, very well. So well done, David. And you know who else are also real and contemporary expert in China, who are currently or very recently have on-ground experience. With this, I'd like to introduce a second panelist. First one is Mr. Rhett Miller. I would keep those introduction brief due to constraint of time, and obviously you will learn from their experience, and they're well qualified to talk on the topic. So Mr. Rhett Miller is the Trade Commissioner for Health in Western China, Austrade. And then second panelist is Mr. James Hutton, a senior partner from Minter Ellison. And then we have Dr. Alastair, a friend and colleague, Vice President of Medical Affairs from United Family Healthcare. And then last but not least, Dr. Regina Karim, Global Science Communication and Claim Manager from H&H Group. So welcome to all the panelists. So I would like to run this session a bit more interactive, but to get the conversation going, I will have some preset questions. I do like to encourage the audience to submit the questions. If you have a question, please type them into the Q&A or chat box, and we will monitoring those, and we will ask the question when opportunity arises. So the first question I'd like to throw to James, if I may. James, welcome to the session. I know you were involved in some major Australian-China project yourself, and after hearing the presentation from David, what's your reflection? Do you have any agreement or disagreement?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Look, I think David did a great job in a short amount of time to get his messages across, and I think all of them resonated. In fact, the first one was his love for Nanjing, and I know from my family, my son studied in Nanjing, so we're all very interested to be able to get back into to China. But more relevantly, I think the key things that resonated and are relevant for, I think, any successful either transaction or longer term partnership between Australia and China are the following. One, that strong and continued, not just initially, but strong and continued connection and support with government, in this case with the Burnett, with the Victorian government and the local government in Nanjing, are utterly critical to successful partnership. I think the other things around the Burnett's acknowledgement that it needed, as do many institutes, to move solely from an R&D focus to accelerating the translation of R&D into commercialisation outcomes is quite critical, but not losing sight of the importance of working hand in hand with the academic collaboration. And that in terms of the things that didn't go right, unfortunately in the Burnett's case with the right or the wrong choice of investor, we see that happening from time to time. You probably, not to be critical of the Burnett, it can happen to anyone, but it just does underline the importance of maximising the success of your efforts by doing as much due diligence as possible to select that right partner. Now, that can go right or wrong for a number of different things, but the right partner will set you up for very long-term success. I'm sure the Burnett has learned from its lessons and will move forward.
Thanks, James. Just follow up on that. You're a lawyer of many experience for M&A area joint venture equity transactions. You obviously have experienced some pitfalls in those transactions, perhaps even in a healthcare deal. And can you just talk about some of those pitfalls and how you think can save people time and money and effort to prevent this happening again, just from your experience? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'd probably, not all the pitfalls are legal ones, but I'll probably, just from my experience, I'd perhaps put them in perhaps 3 different categories of pitfalls. Firstly, and this is a common sense point, but again, it defines good and bad deals. And that is, what defines success for a transaction or a longer term partnership. And the pitfall is not going in with sufficient mutual understanding and taking the time, particularly where it's a joint venture or a partnership, to consider at the outset each party or the other party's objectives. And sometimes that's just solely a communication issue or perhaps even a cultural matter. But many times it's just plain old not taking enough time to create that mutual foundation of understanding. And, sometimes that can be overcome. It just elongates the gestation of the deal. Sometimes it derails the deal because people are just coming from different perspectives. I think from a more technical and perhaps more legal perspective, one thing that I see is a lack of understanding of regulatory pathways in each of the respective countries, not bringing in the relevant compliance or regulatory advisors, particularly in the clinical setting, into the process at an early stage, so that, again, there is not a misunderstanding or differing expectations of what the pathway is. And I think the final one, which again is coming perhaps a bit more to a common sense point, which is, again, spending enough time to properly shape the deal, mutual due diligence, letting the outcomes of due diligence properly, and not just legal due diligence, I'm talking about commercial due diligence, letting that due diligence properly inform the next steps in the relationship and the transaction. Just really a reflection that sometimes good deals take a long time or a longer time to unfold successfully.
Great, thank you. Thank you, James. Next, I'd like to go to Dr. Ellison. Dr. Ellison is a friend for a long time who has significant experiences in Australia and China at senior level for health services. Alastair, can you tell us a bit about what it takes to successfully open hospitals in China and any unique insights and takeaway for Australian in the market?
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. Good afternoon, everyone. That's a very interesting question. Perhaps I can share some of the experiences from United Family Healthcare. I think it is important to set out a bit of a vision of what you want to provide to the community here as well. I think it's first off, it's identifying what the market needs are and what sort of position your company is going into, and whether there's a gap in the market for you to take advantage of. Because there needs to be a bit of a sell to the local government, because you will need the support when you enter into a market like China. And it is particularly important to have a message around what is in it for the community. So that's particularly important as well. One of the things, my CEO, Roberta, often makes a joke about this. When she first started her first hospital in China, in Beijing, there were a lot of regulatory processes, as our previous speakers mentioned before as well. And to start off the first hospital, you can sort of just take a guess how many stamps are required. I'm not talking about letter stamps, but these are stamps of approvals from government agencies in order to start a first hospital. You might think there would be 10, 15, 20 stamps, but actually there were 180 stamps of approvals required to open the first hospital. That means engaging with a lot of different people to get that first step. And it took years of preparation to get to that level. And just opening the hospital doesn't necessarily mean you're free to open all specialties. In China, it is important to realize each specialty department requires a separate license. And it's very heavily regulated. Say, for example, if you want to do cosmetic medicine or you want to do cardiology, there's a separate license for each of these specialties. There is, in fact, a separate license for the emergency department to be able to treat, to manage patients with animal bites. You know, if they present with potential rabies, then that's a separate license. It's very heavily regulated. So this is something that I guess investors need to be conscious of. This is something that is very different from Australia. And I guess where this impacts the investor and the business is your timelines could very easily extend out. And as James mentioned before, as David mentioned before, this might not be something that has been factored into at the start. So this is something to watch out for as well. The third thing I want to talk about is, I guess, for healthcare organizations in China, it is important, it is actually required that you have a local partner. So if you want to open a hospital, you do need 30%, it's regulated. You need a 30% stakeholder that is a local company. And in our first, I guess, venture into United Families Hospitals in Beijing, we partnered with a local tier 1 hospital to develop our first hospital, and that sort of grew along the way as well. So this again comes back to what our previous speakers mentioned, and it links to the due diligence. You want to make sure that the local partner you are working together with understands what the goals are, the directions are, and there are synergies between your company or your skill sets as well as those that you're partnering with. So this is crucial. And I guess working together with a partner that turns out to have different expectations and capabilities than originally promised can be sometimes disastrous. So this is a key takeaway as well. The final point I would like to share with the audience is really about understanding the culture in China. It took me a while to understand the culture as well. I've been in Australia for most of my life. And there is, in China, to do business, it is very much about relationships. And you have to establish that relationship, whether with your stakeholders, your suppliers, your medical staff. And it is a lot about being friends before talking about business. And that relationship needs to be established, and that trust needs to be established as well. Certainly in different cities, the extent of this is different. So, Beijing would be different to Shanghai, would be different to the cities in the Greater Bay Area as well. But this is one common theme that runs through in China. So understanding that is particularly important. Also understanding there are the cultural differences in terms of what the patients require or what the doctors, how they behave, or sometimes it's even in terms of service lines. Say, for example, there's a service in China called postpartum rehabilitation, which doesn't exist in Australia. And what that is basically the mother, it's basically a confinement period of about a month where it is meant to be this period, they stay in a hospital or a dedicated center, or they have home help from expert, we call Yursao, which is basically an assistant who looks after the mom and looks after the baby. And this is meant to, I guess, encourage a recovery in the mother. And these are things that it needs to be understood in the local context in order to have a successful business in China, or health business in China. So those are my sort of 4 main points, Jason.
Thanks, Alastair. I mean, I think the key takeaway point is do your homework before you get into the market, and also adapt yourself to the market conditions. So next one, I'd like to go to Rhett. Rhett Miller, as mentioned before, is our Trade Commissioner. He represents Australian government in our engagement in health. Rhett, given your responsibilities and your background, I'd like to throw you perhaps a very difficult question to answer. So based on current market conditions and relationship, being a Trade Commissioner, how do you see the reality play out for Australian healthcare business in engagement with China? Do you see any silver linings for us?
Well, thank you, Jason, and thank you, ACBC, for hosting us today. I actually think you've given me the easiest question because when talking about silver linings, when it comes to the health sector and the China market, health is one of the bright spots in what we know has been a challenging trade and investment relationship. So what I might do is touch on a few areas of opportunity that might be of interest to the audience and highlight some of those silver linings. The first is consumer health. And Australia is still China's largest source market for complementary medicines, with imports worth nearly $1.2 billion in 2020. Most of that still comes through cross-border e-commerce, with leading brands such as Swiss and Blackmores having well-developed cross-border e-commerce channels. But we're now seeing increasingly businesses like Chemist Warehouse and others expanding from online channels to offline bricks and mortar offerings to further build their brand presence in the market, in what I think is a sign of an increasing maturation of the marketplace. So the continued demand for products in this area has enabled Austrade and other government agencies like the Victorian government to leverage very good outcomes for clients in the sector. Austrade hosted Australian pavilions for over 30 clients in the recent Healthplex Expo and the inaugural Hainan Consumer Products Expo, taking place in the new free trade zone on Hainan Island. The latter occurred on the same day of the suspension of the Australia-China Strategic Economic Dialogue, and yet over $5 million worth of deals have already resulted from our presence at that expo. So again, I think that's a sign of, where health is reflective of silver linings when it comes to the trade and investment relationship. Another area, of course, is health services. The Chinese government predicts the total scale of the health services industry will double to reach 16 trillion RMB, that's 3.27 trillion Australian dollars by 2030. Under CHAFTA, wholly Australian-owned hospitals can be established within specific geographic regions of the country, including major centres of Beijing and Shanghai, and wholly owned Australian-owned aged care institutions can also be established across China with no geographical limits. And we've seen companies such as Lendlease recently construct a magnificent aged care facility just outside Shanghai to take advantage of these very real opportunities. Health services, education and training is also an area of growing interest, given the needs for improved capability and accreditation standards in the health professions, owing to the ageing population and health system reform. So Australian institutions may wish to consider opportunities for partnership with Chinese providers to offer not just award programs, but custom professional development programs tailored for Chinese clients, as well as trainer-trainer programs and curriculum licensing in areas like GP and specialist capability training, aged care management training, and indeed allied health. And we've seen Queensland Health in particular be very successful in terms of partnering with local Chinese institutions to offer these programs in the market. So I'd encourage other Australian providers to consider this. The final area that I wanted to highlight was medtech and biotech. In terms of medtech, I think as many of us know, China is the second largest and fastest growing country market, now contributing to 1/3 of global growth in the sector. But there's still a long way to go when it comes to the market. At a recent MedTech conference I attended in Chongqing, it was highlighted that China is still around 10 years behind the US in MedTech development. And that's driving a push for localization of production of MedTech by foreign companies, which you're seeing in a range of government policy incentives. An example of one of these incentives was released by the NMPA last year, which provides for a faster registration process when imported medical device registrants manufacture products in China-based enterprises that they have invested in. So where we've seen Australian companies take advantage of this measure, we've seen their device approvals be completed in under 6 months. And without the fast track, it can typically take 2 to 3 years for such approvals. So that localization move will continue, I think, with policy settings in coming years. And we saw in a survey of 14 China CEOs of leading MNCs in the market that over 80% have now localized production in China, and over 60% believe localization policy incentives will continue. So for ACBC members, when thinking about opportunities in the market, they should also be about localization of production incentives and how they may be able to work with local partners to take advantage of these measures. In biotech, there's separate opportunities. One example is the Guangdong Health Commission has recently approved 5 designated medical institutions to import and distribute urgently needed drugs and medical devices being used in Hong Kong or Macau, but not yet registered in mainland China with the NMPA. The import of these drugs is part of the GBA initiative, the Greater Bay Area Initiative, and it's one of the measures that has been put in place as part of the initiative to allow for drugs and medical devices not approved on the mainland to be made available in select medical institutions that currently collaborate with or are part invested in Hong Kong by Hong Kong or Macau investors. So Australian biotech companies may wish to explore how they can work with Hong Kong or Macau investors to take advantage of market access opportunities presented by this scheme in terms of getting their Hong Kong or Macau approved drugs or medical devices into entities in Guangdong. So Australian businesses remain proactive in both the biotech and medtech sectors. Cochlear, CSL, ASCOM and George Clinical are all continuing to expand in China. And Austrade's recently facilitated virtual participation for 14 Australian medical device companies to participate in the China Medical Equipment Fair. And we've already seen some key deals coming out of that. Again, a nice silver lining. So just to conclude my response, Austrade's here to help ACBC members. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us via our website at the conclusion of today's session. We have some very good upcoming initiatives in the market for the health sector, and I'm happy to pass on a full list of those to members who are watching today after the session.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rhett, for the comprehensive overview. Perhaps Virginia and I would like to invite you back to talk to members in detail on some of the development in China. Thank you also for giving me a segue to Regina. You mentioned Swiss. Obviously, Regina is from the parent company of Swiss and Austrade. So Regina, welcome to the session as well. I know you led a successful work program on launching the first HMO, not health maintenance organization, but human milk oligosaccharides in infant formula and children's supplement in Australia. I understand there is a big innovation in H&H Group, which is obviously a parent company I mentioned. Can you tell us a bit more about this and the science behind the innovation and how it works and how you relate to China? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason, and thank you very much, ACBC, for having me here. So HMO, as you said, stands for actually human milk oligosaccharides. So they are the complex sugar that represent the third most solid component in the human milk. The amount of HMO in human milk is so high that even exceeds the amount of the total protein. So you can see that HMO are key components in the human milk, and they must have a very important roles in the infant's health. And once ingested, HMO won't be absorbed. Most of the HMO won't be absorbed by the intestinal system. It will go directly to the distal of the intestinal tract as the intake ingredients, and there they serve as the food for the gut microbiota. But the best thing about HMO is they only feed the good bacteria. So that's why they can develop the infant's healthy digestion. And beside that, HMO also have other important roles. HMO also anti-infection that protect the babies from pathogen. HMO also have the role of anti-allergy. And most important, HMO also support the brain development and the cognition development. So you can see that HMO has incredible function. So no wonder people said that the HMO now is the greatest innovation in the pediatric nutrition after DHA. And there are HMO actually very abundant in the breast milk. And we all know that breast milk is the best source of nutrient for the babies. However, there are some conditions that babies cannot get breast milk. And in this condition, infant formula would be the alternative. And now that HMO can be synthesized and can be added in the infant formula, H&H as the parent company of Biostime is very proud to have Biostime as the first brand in Australia to launch HMO in the range of infant formula for babies from birth until 1 year, and also as the children dietary supplement from 1 year and above. So this is definitely a breakthrough innovation in the pediatrician nutrition, especially because it has the new ingredients for infants and children. And the best thing about it is also both in infant formula and then the kid supplement are both made in Australia. So it's making Biostime as the only Australian-made HMO infant formula. And definitely now we also have these products to China and through the CBEC. And we also would like to launch HMO in China as the next plan. But again, as been mentioned by the speakers and the panelists before, some regulations will be the challenge there. And then we are working very closely with our colleagues and suppliers in order to get the approval for HMO in China. So in the meantime, we have HMO product through the CBEC.
Thank you, Regina. Regina has talked about something very specific in terms of development. So now I'd like to throw a question to the audience. I've got a couple of questions coming in. The first question is sent in by Zheng Jun Chen, sorry, and then it's related to medical research support, and Mason Littlejohn also sent out similar sort of questions. So just combine these two questions together. So is there any tangible or funding support program for biomedical researchers, more specifically to support Australian-China collaboration, apart from just the commercialization? So I'm not sure if David, you're there also. Anybody, including David, would like to take that question?
I'm happy to take that one, Jason. So, of course, this event today is being supported by the National Foundation of Australia-China Relations, and it will support research as part of its grant programs. So I'd encourage those who submitted the question to go and look at the website and look at the requirements for submitting an application for a grant for any joint research project that they're looking at.
Thank you, Rhett. And I'm also aware of the Victorian-Jonesville relationship for that. You can also apply for joint scientific collaborations between the two jurisdictions. And there is a second part to Mason's question. How can we ensure market business opportunity feedback through research once a commercialization happens? Maybe I'm not sure if David, are you still there? Are you able to answer that question from Mason about profit generating from the collaboration or commercialization, going back to research?
I'm sorry, Jason, I was just on a brief call.
Sorry, David, being a bit cheeky. I've given you still on the call, so I'm asking you a question from the audience. Basically, the question was regarding how do we ensure profit or support, financial support we got from scientific collaboration goes back to research?
Yeah, I mean, the grants that we've had, that's fairly straightforward because the grants are always attached to a specific project. That has really not been a problem in our partnerships. There was a very clear understanding that research and development was an essential part of what we were doing. And we, particularly with the Victoria Jiangsu grants, we have a very close and long-standing relationship with Brian Cow, who's our R&D partner there. And that has not really been a problem at all, including negotiating outcomes for some joint IP that was developed and that sort of thing. But certainly it requires very clear communication and mutual understanding.
Thank you, David. So I don't see any more questions, but I have another question for James. Recently, there has been some changes in foreign investment and competition rules in Australia. Do you see any of these change provides a hindrance to getting healthcare deal done?
I'd probably say, before going directly to answer that, before the most recent FIRB changes over the last year, my experience was, unless it was a very, very large transaction, and there have been some of those as well, a lot of deals were flying under the FIRB monetary threshold. And similarly, for competition reasons, particularly in the healthcare and biotech sector, competition is not so much of an issue in the early stages, particularly. So unless you were a foreign government investor, FIRB wasn't very much of a hold-up. With the new rules, the rules haven't actually changed that much that I think will affect healthcare greatly. There was always a sensitivity around use of data, privacy issues with patient information. You now have the concept of sensitive sectors, so sensitive critical Australian infrastructure. You could see that encroaching in some areas, for example, if it was vaccine production or something that was really critical to health infrastructure. But unless you stray into some of those really sensitive areas, I don't think the regime is going to change that much that it will be a material impediment to bilateral trade. So no, I steadily move forward.
Great, thank you, James. With that, I'd like to thank to all our panelists and also David for a wonderful session. I'd like to pass back to Virginia.